My name is Mark Townsen. I'm writing all of this down so everyone will know, most especially my mother. I want her to have some idea of what happened to me, what could still happen to me. And I don't want her to feel guilty. This is my decision, and it's an informed one. I'll start from the start. After 6 months working alongside Jason Jennings in the Blackshear branch in Georgia, we became good friends. It doesn't get much more boring than marketing for a printer company. I could have done something else, I suppose, but I was comfortable. I wasn't half bad at my job, and the salary was decent enough. I just never thought of leaving. I have to say, however, that work got much more fun after Jason came on board. We started up a Friday evening beer club with some of the office crew. I started looking forward to work because I knew Jason would find some way to make the day interesting. He was somewhat of a class clown. Everybody loved him. It was around the 6-month mark of knowing Jason that I was offered a promotion and a transfer to another branch 2 hours away in Waverly. The pay was better, and I was ready for a change, so I accepted the position. When you leave a job, you promise everyone you'll stay in touch. Of course, that rarely happens. Little by little, my colleagues and I drifted apart socially, as well as geographically. Jason and I would text every now and then. Sometimes we'd even speak on the phone when I had to call someone at the Blackshear branch. This is precisely where the strangeness began. We had a receptionist in Blackshear, but a demanding boss had her pulled in a million directions. She often left the phone answering to the other workers. In this case, it was usually Jason picking up the phone. Pretty sure he had a thing for her. Anyways, I remember the first time I called, and Jason answered after what felt like the 10th ring. He sounded a little off. He was quiet, which was odd. The Jason I knew was always ready with a witty comment or some borderline inappropriate question. In this particular instance, I felt like I was speaking with a stranger. I remember asking him if everything was okay, and instead of answering, he abruptly transferred me to the head marketing manager, the man I'd called to speak with. Clearly something wasn't right. In the short time I'd known Jason, I'd never seen him behave rudely with anyone, least of all me. He was never moody or sour. He wasn't easily offended, either. In fact, the reason I liked him so much was because he was so lighthearted and easy to take. Even when he was stressed with work, he would find a way to put a positive spin on things. After I got off the phone, I sent him a text message. He texted back an apology and quickly changed the subject. I spoke to him 3 more times in the next couple of weeks. During the first 2 calls, he seemed like his old self, but on that 3rd phone call, he was distant and reserved again. When I pressed him, he didn't make any sense. I suggested we get together in my neck of the woods. It would do him good to have some downtime. It was like he didn't even hear me. He muttered a few unconnected phrases. He told me he had something on his mind all the time. And then he said under his breath, Monsoon Point. I was about to ask for an explanation when he laughed and said, Maybe you're right, Mark. I probably need a few days off. He promised we'd set something up and then transferred my call, at least amicably this time. This exchange, however, lingered with me. When my business was done, I hung up and immediately texted Jason to reiterate that he was welcome to stay with me any time. In reply, I got 4 texts, again disjointed and poorly spelled, saying he was just stressed and I shouldn't worry. His reassurance didn't work on me. I knew and felt that something was very wrong. What was going on? I'm all for respecting my friend's privacy, but what was going on here was just so odd. I had to intervene. I got permission to leave work early the next day, and then drove 2 hours over to my hometown, Blackshear. Arriving at the office building, I took the elevator up alone to the 4th floor. When I stepped into my old office, I noticed right away that Jason's desk had been cleared out. On it rested only the computer and a couple of empty paper trays. Susan at the front desk greeted me cheerfully. Her friendly blue eyes hid behind her reading glasses. Short blonde hair hung around her face, framing her smile. I asked her if Jason was around. She hesitated, trying to find the words to explain. "Let me get Dennis for you." In less than 20 seconds, I heard the boss coming towards us down the long, gray hallway. He greeted me with a firm handshake. We small-talked for a few minutes. He asked me about the Waverly branch, my new job, if I missed the Blackshear crew. "I'm actually looking for Jason," I interjected. Dennis's smile faded promptly. He invited me to follow him back down the long hallway into his office. Susan began to say something, and Dennis held up a hand to halt her. When we got to his office, he closed the door behind us. As he moved to sit at his desk, he simply told me that Jason had moved on. Moved on? He quit, Mark, just today. He quit? Did he say why? No, he didn't, but I can tell you that he walked out right in the middle of a huge sale with an important client. I've had to pull in other staff to finish this. He didn't even pack up his things. Dennis leaned over and hauled up a good-sized box, dropping it haphazardly in front of me. "Here, when you see him, could you give him this?" he asked, clearly annoyed. I picked up the box. It was lighter than I expected. Dennis was clearly unable to associate Jason apart from the recent sale he'd walked out on. As a result, it felt like we were talking about two different people. "This is so unlike him," I said, gently defending my friend. "Not my concern now, Mark." I nodded, understanding now that I could not change Dennis's mood, or perhaps felt I did not have the time. I needed to find Jason. Taking the elevator back down, I threw the box of Jason's belongings onto the passenger seat of my car and headed towards Jason's house, a 10-minute drive. When I arrived, I knocked on the front door. No answer. I then called out through the windows. I tried the back door, too. Nothing. No one was home. There was no movement inside that I could detect. I tried my luck, spending a few minutes inspecting plants and pulling up the welcome mat for a spare key. Nothing. The weather had picked up by this time. The sky was dark. Rain was on its way. I sat in my car considering my next move. Maybe there was a clue to Jason's whereabouts among his belongings. I opened the box and found the usual collection of desk paraphernalia rolling around at the bottom, and 3 larger items: a framed photo of Jason with his nephews playfully climbing on him, a meter-long, rather thick red rubber band, and a small black book. The red elastic band sparked a memory of Jason telling the entire office about these shoulder exercises his physiotherapist advised him to do throughout the day. I picked up the little black book and flipped through its pages. I could tell it was a journal dating back to about a year ago. Almost all the pages were filled with writing. I felt a bit uncomfortable looking at the contents, so I placed it back in the box along with the other things. I decided to check out a few places we used to hang out together. Burger Bait on O'Connell Street and Black's Coffee a few blocks down. In both locations, I asked after Jason, but no one had seen him in weeks. I finally gave up and headed to my mother's house. I'd stay there for the night and swing by Jason's house again in the morning. Mom greeted me with a nostalgic dinner for the two of us. She served it on brown and green plates that I recognized from when I was a kid. I didn't realize how hungry I was until I smelled the barbecue pork chops placed in front of me. For the duration of the meal, my worry eased. Perhaps feeling so content is what made me open up to my mother. I didn't usually share my private life with her, but she had met Jason and knew that he was a good friend of mine. In a few quick sentences, I told her how strangely Jason had been acting, and that now he was nowhere to be found. I went over every detail of what had happened, including Jason's mention of Monsoon Point. I jumped. The sound of her dinner plate snapping onto the tile shocked us both. "Mom!" Unintentionally, my voice spoke as loud as the plate had broken. I crouched down to stack up the larger pieces. She tried to brush me off with a laugh. "Don't be silly, Mark." "It's no problem, Mom. I got this." I scooped the smaller pieces into the dustpan. "No, not that," she said shakily. She had seated herself down again at the table, on the side of the chair, fingers linked, one arm resting on the backrest of the chair. She did not look as comfortable as she was trying to seem. "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. "Monsoon Point?" I shook my head. "Well, surely you've heard the stories." "What stories?" Mom got up and started putting dishes into the sink, clearly reluctant to talk. "Tell me, Mom, what is Monsoon Point?" She sighed as she ran some water over the dishes. "When we were kids, we would go there sometimes. You know, your father and I moved here to Blackshire from where we had grown up together. It was just a few miles down the road from Monsoon Point. As children, we heard stories about a magician who had moved into the town and died there. There were—" My mother looked out the kitchen window as if it were the bars of a prison. The water was still running, separating the leftover barbecue sauce on my plate. "Mom?" "Well, this magician, it was said he brought a dark spirit with him, and that the town was haunted by the ghosts of the dead. There was a popular myth that a group of teenagers from our town had gone to Monsoon Point, on a kind of dare, I think, and they'd never come back. We all thought it was strange, too, given how close the town was, that we'd never met anyone from there. I have to admit, every time we passed the road sign for the place on Highway 18, I felt a chill run through me. I know my mother very well. She's too sensitive for her own good, the kind of person who can't watch a scary movie without staying up all night. So I'll admit, I was taking her story with a huge grain of salt. Just some childish nightmare that had stayed with her, I thought. What truly got me was when she turned her gaze out the window onto me, and she spoke these words. "Promise me you won't go there, Mark. Promise me." "It's okay, Mom. Don't worry. I'm not going anywhere." I smiled, trying to diffuse the situation. Eventually, we started talking about other things, and that was all that was said between us about Monsoon Point. Later that night, we watched some TV together over a glass of wine. Eventually, I retired to my old bedroom. I sat up in bed for a while, trying to piece together my day and what little I had to work with about Jason's disappearance. The one thing that I kept coming back to was Monsoon Point. My mother's story had stirred a deep curiosity in me. Could this really be where Jason was? And if so, why? Deep in thought, I was staring at Jason's box of belongings on the floor. It was then that I made the decision to open it and take out the small black journal. If Jason was in danger, the police wouldn't be concerned over his disappearance for another couple of days. I needed an answer, and this was the only thing I had that might provide one. The journal began in August 2010. For the most part, Jason recorded memories, his nephew's birthday party, a long weekend beach trip. I flipped a little further in. Every entry I read appeared to be the musings of a normal guy who enjoyed his life. I decided to skip the middle and jump to the most recent entry. A chill ran over me as I stared at the last page, covered in 2 words only. Monsoon Point, Monsoon Point, Monsoon Point. I turned back a page to find the same thing, written over and over again. I kept turning back pages, trying to locate when this mania had begun. 10, 13, 19 pages of mindless repetition, preceded by a strange entry. The dreams won't stop. I have to go back. I have to finish it. Finish what? Closing the journal, I felt a sharp turn of anxiety in my stomach. I knew what I had to do now. Despite the promise I made to my mother, I would drive to Monsoon Point tomorrow and look for Jason. You have to understand that at this point, I didn't have good enough reason to believe any of my mother's warnings. I had no preconceived notions about Monsoon Point. Jason was missing, and it was looking more and more likely that he was there. I had to at least go check it out. The next day I woke up early and cooked Mom a surprise breakfast. She seemed eager to keep me around, so I obliged by hanging out until early afternoon. When we hugged goodbye, I noticed that she clung to me for an extra few seconds, and I left. I spent the afternoon and early evening in Blackshear. I went back to the local brew houses where Jason and I used to hang. Back to his house, I even returned to the office to see if he had shown up. No sign of him anywhere. Eventually, I couldn't delay any longer. I did the smart thing and went to the police. They asked me a bunch of questions I couldn't answer, but I told them what I knew, except for the part about the journal and Monsoon Point. You may think less of me for holding back on this information, but the cop at the station was already looking at me like he had better things to do. I wanted him to take Jason's disappearance seriously, so I didn't tell him about the journal, or about where I was traveling later that evening. It probably wouldn't have mattered anyway. I left the station and headed for Monsoon Point. After about an hour of driving, I pulled off for some gas and cheap coffee. Another hour in, and I left Highway 18, following the road sign to my destination. I saw the very sign, I imagined, that had given my mother a scare back in the day. I noticed the greenery around the road was gradually changing. Patches of tall grass turned into rows of tall pines, becoming so thick it was no longer possible to see far off the side of the roadway. The sun had almost set. I had the impression I was driving into a long, dark tunnel with no light at the end. Finally, my headlights picked up a weather-beaten sign. Welcome to Monsoon Point. Stay a while. Population 300. Street lamps started cropping up every couple of miles and then more frequently closer to town. A few country homes came into view. As I entered what I assumed to be Main Street, I slowed to get a better look at my surroundings. A gas station, post office, library, grocery store. The only building with lights on was a large church, which, on closer inspection, turned out to be a restaurant. The neon sign hanging over the stately double doors read, Pancake Manor, open 6 a.m. to 3 a.m. I glanced down at my watch, 9:47 p.m. Here seemed as good a place as any to begin my search. I parked my car and entered the restaurant. The place was large, well-lit, and all 6 of the circular booths were empty and available. A large menu hung high behind the counter. In several places, black marker covered the original print with price changes. One man sat at the restaurant bar by the register. He was reading a newspaper at the counter, a thick hat covering his ears. I sat down in a green-seated booth opposite him, next to a large bay window overlooking the street. I was trying to lay off the sugar, but a quick look at the menu told me I'd have a hard time avoiding it here. The swinging sound of saloon-like doors between the staff area and the main floor made me glance up. An older woman with a kind face and a pencil behind her ear approached, looking me right in the eyes. "What'll it be?" "Just a coffee for now." The woman's name tag read Jessie. She didn't bother writing down my easy-to-remember order. "No food?" I looked back at the menu and asked, "Got any bacon and eggs, toast, things like that?" I offered a pathetic smile I knew gave away my tourist identity. Jessie folded her arms and politely told me all they had was what was on the menu. Okay. In that case, I'll have the macadamia madness. Hold the ice cream." This time, Jessie scribbled my order on her notepad and flipped it shut. Her writing pad was pink with a yellow J and a love heart underneath the Pancake Manor logo. "Coming right up." She winked at me. A small wait, and Jessie brought out my coffee. I wanted to strike up a conversation, so I asked her about Monsoon Point, and if she could suggest popular tourist locations. "This right here is the heart of Monsoon Point," she replied, placing an index finger on my booth table. "It really is much busier during the day. You came at a good time. Besides that, the museum might have something you fancy. We've got a famous magician buried in our cemetery, and there's a hiking trail if you head north. Well, I don't know. What kinds of things are you looking for?" At this point, Jessie gave a very small glance over her left shoulder. It was subtle, but I was sitting in a position that I could see where she was looking without moving my body. "Oh," I said, pretending to think, but looking along her line of sight. All I saw was that man at the counter. He was staring directly at us. "I'm just here to get away, really," I lied, flashing what I hoped was a convincing smile. I leaned back into the booth. "Well, you've come to the right place," she chirped. "Wait till you try those pancakes." I smiled. "Know where I might be able to stay tonight?" "Ben's Motel, round back," she answered, pointing with her thumb behind her head. "Usually has free rooms. Ring the doorbell. He'll come right out any hour of the night, except between 3 and 6. "Ah, well, thank you," I responded gratefully. "Before you go, would you have any papers I could look at?" "I'll bring it over to you." Jessie disappeared into the back kitchen. The man at the counter had gone back to reading his newspaper. His stare had made me uneasy. Maybe it was because Jessie seemed to have noticed it as well. A few minutes later, the waitress returned to deliver the man's order, a very generous portion of pancakes with banana and ice cream. I became aware of an old Andrews Sisters song playing through the karaoke machine. "And we all know that when he plays, he puts them all in a trance. The cats all holler hooray. You'll hear them say, 'Beat me, Daddy, to the bar.'" What a strange place, I thought. A World War II hit accompanying a sugar-only breakfast menu, all inside a former place of worship. Jessie and the man were about 20 feet or so away from me, so I didn't think I would have been able to hear any of their conversation. But I could have sworn that I did not see the waitress's mouth move at all while delivering those pancakes. She placed the plate down in front of him without the cheerful hospitality she'd given me. She just looked at him for at least 5 painful, long seconds, and then disappeared out back again. Only when she left did the man begin eating his pancakes. I turned my attention to the view outside my window. The streetlights were on, providing a view of the sidewalks and some part of the park across the road. I didn't see anyone walking about this time of night. I could just make out the Monsoon Public Library sign at the corner of the park, and next to it a cafe of some kind, distinguishable by the large blue neon coffee cup sign in the window. Jessie returned with my pancakes. I don't know why I expected a smaller portion than the man at the bar. My stack was just as high. She also placed a single newspaper in front of me, the Monsoon Chronicle. I assumed wrong, thinking there would be a wider selection of papers from surrounding towns. Nonetheless, I thanked her, declined a refill on my coffee, and started eating. The pancakes were hot and delicious. I wonder if Jason came here, I thought to myself, and resolved to ask Jessie when she returned to collect my plate. I ate every last morsel of pancake, using the final bites to sponge up the maple syrup on the plate, wiping it clean. The place was generous with its syrup. I hadn't used even half of what was in the dispenser. After Jessie had cleared the other man's plate, this time without the staring contest, she came back to my table to do the same. "Excuse me, ma'am. Would you happen to remember seeing a man here in the last day or so? He's a bit shorter than me, big belly, wears black-framed glasses, blonde hair." Jessie looked up to the roof like she was racking her memory. No, I haven't, hon. Why's that?" Not wanting to be caught in a lie, I told her a half-truth. "I'm supposed to meet him here. We were going to do some hiking this weekend. He didn't tell me what time he'd be arriving." "Oh, well, I'm sorry. I haven't seen anyone. We don't get a lot of tourists. If I do see someone matching that description, I'll let you know." I laughed, brushing it off. That's okay. I'm sure I'll find him tomorrow." Jessie stood smiling at me for an uncomfortable amount of time, though it was a different sort of stare than what she'd given to the man at the counter. Her red hair was frizzy, like she'd been working all day. I noticed a small bead of sweat clinging to her cheek near her right ear, just waiting to slide down her face. Some of her teeth were yellow, her nostrils flared out widely. And then a peculiar thing happened. I thought that Jessie was leaning in to take my coffee cup, so I tried to make things easier for her by placing the cutlery and the maple syrup jar on top of my plate. My prediction was incorrect. Jessie was going for my plate, not my coffee cup. Our miscommunication led to the plate being knocked off the table along with the maple syrup. In an attempt to rescue the items, Jessie dropped her serving tray and notepad. "Oh, I'm so sorry." I stood up in my booth, intending to help her, but she stretched out her arm and held up a hand in front of my face. "You just sit right there, hon. These things happen." She spoke firmly. I detected just a hint of frustration in her voice. She bent down quickly, and I noticed that the first thing she went for was not the maple syrup oozing onto the floor, but rather her notepad. She placed that item first on her tray and stood up. Her hair even frizzier than normal, having been overturned briefly. Her face flushed. "Don't move a muscle. I'll be right back with the mop." She gathered my plates and coffee cup off the table and scurried back to the staff area. I chose not to move, not in submission to her orders, but because I was thinking about the 2 seconds in which Jessie's notepad had sat on the floor before she picked it up. In those 2 seconds, I saw a few words scribbled on it. 6'5", 180 pounds, mole on right cheek, short brown hair. What I had seen on her notepad was not a pancake order, it was a physical description of me. I heard the salon-like doors open and shut as Jessie came back, pushing a mop handle sticking out of a yellow bucket on wheels. She made quick work of cleaning up the spill and apologized to me again. "Be sure to come back tomorrow," she said. "We're filled with more locals during the day. Maybe somebody will have seen your friend." She winked at me again and returned to the staff area. What was going on in this town? I looked up to see the man at the counter was halfway through a chocolate milkshake and reading the back page of the newspaper. I considered talking to him just to get a good look at his face at least, just in case I had to pick him out of a lineup one day. I decided instead to slip out as quietly as I could. I hadn't even touched the newspaper the waitress had given me. I took the short drive to the motel around the corner. It was a small place, all the rooms visible at first glance in a sort of half square. A green neon sign flashed Ben's Motel unrhythmically. I could hear its neon buzz increase in volume as I drove closer. Rain was spitting down on me as I dashed into a pitifully small porch area and rang the bell. I had to ring a few times before a man, I could only assume it was Ben himself, answered and let me in. He was wearing a long-sleeved black turtleneck with his jeans. Something that looked like dirt clung to his grizzled gray beard. Hi, I'd like a room for tonight, please. Ben scribbled something down in a large book that lay on the welcome desk and handed me a key. Room 3. Checkout is at 11 a.m. That'll be $80. I paid him in cash and thanked him. I was just going to turn around and leave, but then considered that such abruptness might be taken as unfriendly. After seeing what was on Jesse's notepad, I no longer trusted anyone in Monsoon Point. But I needed them to trust me. While I have you, could you suggest any sights to see tomorrow? On his right hand, Ben wore a silver ring with a black stone in it. He used the same fingers on that hand to turn the ring around his middle finger. He didn't seem like the nervous type, just fidgety. Museum's your best bet. Don't go without stopping by Pancake Manor. Oh, and our cemetery has the tombstone of Capital Cain, the magician. He started a lot of magic you're probably familiar with. All of this was said without emotion or interest. He seemed to be eyeing me with a smile that said, "Get out of my office." So I wrapped up the conversation. Great, well, thanks for the tips. Good night. Ben didn't answer. He just stared at me and kept turning his ring. For a moment, I wondered if he was really human or some kind of check-in desk automaton. He just gave me the creeps. Somehow I got the courage to turn my back on him and walk out of the office. I moved my car in front of room 3 and grabbed my duffel bag. The rain was coming down hard now. It took a few wiggles of the key in the knob to get inside. Room 3 was what you might expect from a roadside motel, simple and tidy. A small television to the left, mirror, desk, and chair to the right. In the center, a double bed and a lamp on a nightstand. Finally, a small bathroom with a stand-up shower. The dull off-white walls of the room matched the dull yellow and blue duvet cover on the bed. Above it hung a surreal-style painting of a woman whose head was a gold mallet that floated above her body, the only thing in the painting that wasn't gray-toned. In the bottom corner were the artist's details. James Telmer, grade 10, Monsoon High. In the bathroom, the towels were clean but worn. I was tired. I wasted no time getting ready for bed. After brushing my teeth, I settled in under the covers, hoping that exhaustion would lead me into a deep sleep. But I could not stop thinking about what I had seen on that notepad. I felt on edge and unsafe. I got up and angled the desk chair underneath the knob of the entry door. And I decided to try Jason's phone one more time before calling it a day. I recalled the night I had gotten he and Susan's number. Susan had messaged us both a photo of the three of us, all at work, bored out of our minds as we finalized paperwork on an important order. Susan had suggested we play the weirdest thing you can find in the office. It was like a scavenger hunt, and no place was out of bounds. When we found something, we had to bring it back to the group for show and tell. Oddly enough, I had stumbled upon a couple of tins of cat food in Gail's desk. Gail was an older woman that sat by the three of us. I remember being so excited when I found them. Such a strange thing to find in someone's desk. Jason, Susan, and I eventually met back at our work area, holding our items behind our backs. On the count of 3, we revealed them to each other. As I held out my 2 purple tins of cat food, Jason held out a small orange kitten. We freaked out and spent the last 30 minutes of our shift creating a story about why Gail couldn't keep the cat at her house. Susan took a photo of the 3 of us with the kitten and the cat food and sent it directly to her. She called us immediately. Laughing, she explained that she had to sell the kitten because her daughter was allergic. But the buyer never came through, so she hid it in the office. For the next week, she got us back by filling our drawers to the brim with dry cat food. Jason's number brought the photo from that night onto my screen. Looking at him with his mouth wide open in dramatized shock, holding the kitten like the Lion King, reminded me why I'd come here. Feeling uneasy was not enough of an excuse to leave. I called the number. 4 seconds later, I heard the piercing sound of a high-pitched ringtone. It was coming from... I dropped to my knees and brushed the hideous duvet aside to look under the bed. There was Jason's phone, all lit up, with my name in large letters on the screen. What the hell was going on? I grabbed the phone and ended the call. Cradling it in my hands, I noticed it was seemingly in normal condition. Somehow, housekeeping had missed it. Or was I meant to find it? The phone confirmed for me that Jason had most certainly been here, and recently. Tomorrow I would look all over town, and I would ask more people, no matter how strange they were. Something was going on here. Eventually I drifted off to sleep. I awoke in the morning to a knock on the door. The room did a good job of keeping the sun out. It was pitch black inside. I only realized how late in the morning it was when I removed the defensive chair from underneath the door handle and opened it. The bright light took me by surprise. "Housekeeping," a woman said to me. She was a blur for a few seconds as my eyes adjusted to the morning light. Then I saw her. Her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She wore jeans and a baggy forest green zip-up sweater. She had both hands on a cart that held cleaning products, which was the only real evidence of her being the maid. "I thought checkout was at 11 a.m.? I asked groggily. "Sir, it is 11 a.m., she replied coolly. "Oh, okay, well, I'd like to stay another night. I got in late last night, so I didn't use the bathroom or anything. There's no need to clean my room today." I didn't want her coming into the room. If this were the place Jason had stayed, I wasn't done looking around yet. She nodded slowly at me, looking back into my room as if I were hiding something. "I'll go over and pay for another room right now. You don't have to do anything in the room," I said. Turning around to throw some jeans and a shirt on, I intentionally left the door open so that she could look inside, hopefully concluding that I wasn't hiding anything. I even drew back the curtains to let the sun in. As secretly as I could, I took both cell phones and put them in my inside coat pockets, stomped on my sneakers, and grabbed my wallet and key card. As I was leaving to go to the office, she grabbed my forearm and stared at me intently. "You'll have a secret soon enough," she said blankly. I froze. Her stare was as cold as her grip. Her voice had gotten lower, deeper, almost as if it were not her voice at all. Removing her hold on me, one finger at a time, she pushed the cart onward toward the next room and disappeared inside. I considered following her, but I had the feeling she was more disturbed than had any actual information that could help me. As I processed this, I was already at the entrance to the office. Ben was sitting at the desk. I opened the door and then my wallet, glancing back to my room. No one else was around. I handed over another $80 in cash, explaining that I wanted to stay one more night. Ben raised his eyebrows but said nothing, just kept spinning that black ring around his finger as he kept his gaze on the computer screen. "Open all the time except from 3 to 6 a.m., he said unnecessarily. I went directly back to my room and searched the place thoroughly. Nothing more gave any indication that Jason had been there. I showered, dressed, and considered my next move. I decided to throw all my things in the car in case I had to pull out of town fast. I got behind the wheel and felt my stomach grumbling. No matter what the day brought, I still had to eat. I drove around the corner to the main street. Pancake Manor seemed to bellow over me. The old church was almost too tall in comparison to the small businesses around it. In the light of day, I saw that next to that blue neon coffee cup sign were the words, "Coffee, coffee." That will do, I thought. There were a couple of parking spots right outside the cafe. I moved my car into one, locked it, and walked through the front door. A bell announced my entrance. As I made my way to the counter, a young woman came into view, She had black hair down to her shoulders and wore a red and white striped apron over jeans and a white blouse. "Good morning," she beamed at me. "Did you want takeout?" "I was hoping to dine in." She smiled and moved around the counter to a table and chair near the window. "Take a seat. The breakfast menu is right here." She gestured towards it. "Can I get you a coffee to start?" "Yes, please, large with cream." "No problem." Her smile revealed healthy white teeth. She seemed happy, normal. I had to remind myself of the folk I'd met so far in Monsoon Point, and was careful not to give away my trust too quickly. I sat alone by the window and looked out into the street. A few people walked by, in and out of the grocery store mostly. On the surface, this was an ordinary town with people doing ordinary things. Maybe it was just a select few who had it in for me. I picked out fairly quickly what I wanted on the menu and then looked around at the interior of Coffee. A few tables and chairs, a selection of baked goods and a small stand by the cash register, a fridge behind the counter with sodas and bottled water. A closer look at the art on the walls revealed black and white photos of coffee shops from all around the world: Italy, Spain, Kenya. I noted that these were the first signs of an outside world that I had seen anywhere in Monsoon Point. Everything else seemed to draw attention back inward to the town itself. The motel art, the sole newspaper available at Pancake Manor. This place, on the contrary, seemed like something I'd find back in Blackshear. The woman returned with my coffee. "Thank you," I said gratefully. "Are you new around here? I don't remember seeing you," the woman said. I stiffened defensively. "Yes, I'm just here for a couple of days visiting a friend." I tried to be as vague as possible. She leaned in and said in a lower voice, "Not too much here, is there?" She smiled, standing on one foot while the other leaned up against her leg. "Well, we just wanted to do some hiking, get away from the city mostly." I took a sip of the coffee. "Wow," I said, looking into the cup. "This is really good." She smiled proudly. I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but I'm surprised." I took another sip. "Well, thank you. That's very nice of you." She switched feet, leaning on the other leg. "I've been making coffee all my life. Owned a few places in the city. My husband and I moved here 2 months ago, and I thought, why not try brewing a good cup in Monsoon Point? The only other coffee place here is Pancake Manor." "Well, I tried their coffee last night, and this," I pointed to my mug, "this takes the cake." "Well, if you think so, spread the word. Not too many people have tried my brew. Sometimes my husband brings his work crew here. They seem to enjoy it, but I don't know. This town seems to be pretty stuck in its ways. They don't like change." I realized I was smiling at this woman. She was the first experience of civilized communication I'd enjoyed since my arrival. I'd already decided I would take a coffee to go and leave her a big tip. "Mark is my name." I nodded towards her. "Kate," she said, sticking out a hand. I shook it. "Well, Kate, I'd love an order of your big breakfast." I folded up the menu and put it back between the napkins and the ketchup. "Sure thing," she said, and headed back behind the counter. 2 months ago, I thought to myself. I wonder if she's experienced the sorts of things I have. I wonder if she met Jason. Breakfast arrived quickly, and I gobbled it down in no time. Toast, eggs, bacon, fried tomato, and a perfectly ripe avocado. I was stuffed. I piled my silverware and empty coffee mug onto the plate and returned to the counter to get a coffee to go. "Keep the change," I said, handing her a 50. "Wow, thank you very much," she replied as she slid the bill into the register. I decided this would be a good moment to ask some questions. "Kate, have you seen anyone else in the last day or so? Somebody maybe who also didn't look like he was from around here?" My question was awkwardly put, and I knew it. No, I don't think so," she answered slowly, squinting as if trying to understand my question. I ironed it out. "My friend, Jason, He has a bit of a beer gut, blonde hair, thick black glasses. I was supposed to meet him here yesterday, but I haven't seen him, and I can't get a hold of him. Goodness, Kate said, looking a little worried. No, I haven't seen him. Usually it's just the regulars around here, you know. It's okay, I'm sure I'll find him. And that was that. I left coffee, and decided to leave my car parked out front. I wandered around town that afternoon, looking for any sign of Jason. I tried a few times to strike up a conversation with some people, but they all shut me down as soon as I approached them. It was about 5 p.m. when I wandered over to the cemetery. I thought I'd check out the grave I'd heard so much about, the one for the famous magician. As I entered, I noticed to my right a small service going on. 5 or 6 people all dressed in black with a pastor reading out of a book. They stood around a casket next to a pile of earth and a hole in the ground. Kind of a late hour for a funeral, I thought, adding it to the list in my head of weird things about this place. Walking through the grids of gravestones, I soon spotted the one I'd come for. It was large, about my height, with gaudy plastic flowers spread all around it. Approaching the front, I read, Magician Capital Kane, Monsoon Point's very own. Taken too soon, you'll be missed. I remember thinking about my job and how embarrassed I would be if someone put a similar sentiment on my tombstone. I was broken out of my sardonic reverie by a voice close behind me. You're the one who's been asking about Jason? I turned around quickly to behold a tall man with combed, neat black hair and a very worried expression on his face. Turn around, he whispered urgently. I did what he commanded, but tried at the same time to keep him in my peripheral vision. Who are you? I shouldn't be here, he answered. I could barely hear him. How do you know Jason? Not here. Meet me later tonight, 3 a.m. 14 Lemon Tree Avenue. Come the back way. Back way? What? Why the secrecy? Is Jason okay? I waited for a reply, but getting none, I turned around to find that the man had gone. By this time the sun was setting. The funeral I saw upon entering continued. I ran my hands over my face and began pacing. Who the hell was that guy? Where was he leading me? Why did he seem so frightened? For the next few hours, time moved slowly. I went to the grocery store and bought a hot meal for dinner. I sat in my motel room eating and looking around the room again, in places where Jason's things may have fallen or been left behind on purpose. Under the couch cushions, the cupboards in the bathroom, the small slot between the television and the wall, nothing. On a map in the room, I saw that Lemon Tree Avenue was quite close. I could walk it. But I chose instead to drive. 3 a.m., I thought to myself. The only time when nothing in this town is open. It must have been the adrenaline that kept me up until 2:30 a.m. That's when I left for Lemon Tree Avenue. I parked a few houses down from number 14 and approached cautiously. The air was cold and sharp. All was dead silent, apart from my footsteps. That was until I approached the house. I froze when I made out figures in the front yard. They were all seated around a picnic table. I forced myself to unfreeze, hiding behind one of the lemon trees. My heart was beating so hard and fast I was afraid it would give away my location. Who were they? From my vantage point, I slowly peered out at the scene before me. I couldn't take my eyes away from what I saw. The group seemed to be a family, a mother and 3 children, all dressed in white nightgowns. They looked like characters from a story written 100 years ago. I kept hearing a familiar sound. Familiar, yes, but I couldn't place it. Every time the sound resumed, I ducked back behind the tree, afraid that whatever was making it was coming after me. It was a crumpling, or better, a crushing sound. I swallowed painfully, my throat was so dry, and started moving slowly toward the door. Squinting in the moonlight, I realized where the sound was coming from. It was the sound of cereal moving inside a cardboard box and then poured into a bowl. The mother poured milk over the cereal and passed a bowl to each child. There was something off about this normal family scene. For one thing, it was the middle of the night, not the usual time for breakfast. But also, the children crunched the cereal in unison, rhythmically, and without opening their mouths. Goosebumps covered my body. It was 3 a.m. and unbearably cold. I realized I was shaking. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to get some physical control back, but it was nearly impossible. They all just sat and stared at each other, chewing together. I glanced over to the letterbox. My heart sank even further when I realized that this house was the house I intended to enter. The moon was full and shone down into the front yard like a beam from a spaceship. House 14 was a small home with a well-kept flower garden. A small, old car was parked in the driveway. Everything else seemed normal. Trivially, I noticed the smell of lemons. I looked up and down the sidewalk both ways. The street was in fact lined with lemon trees. Suddenly, I had an urge to grasp something tightly, a weapon of some kind. I was horrified at the thought of having to use it, but I felt so out of place, so afraid. I felt a certainty that the town was bigger than me and could swallow me up. Before going into the house, I tiptoed back to my car and searched for something I could use to defend myself. There was nothing I could find. Just that box of Jason's things and a phone charger. Nothing. Frustrated and cold, I gave up looking, gently closed the car door, and made my way back to the house. I realized I was sweating when a bead dripped down my back, causing me to shudder. When I returned to the house, the family of 4 was gone. I froze and frantically looked around, listening intently, expecting them to jump out at me from behind one of the trees. But they didn't. I was alone. The picnic bench was empty. There were no signs of cereal, milk, or bowls. No sign anyone had ever been there. Not for 1 second did I ask myself if I imagined what I saw. There were just too many details that I'd remembered. The mother had long hair that twisted all the way down her back in a braid. The milk was in a glass jar. The crunching in unison. God, I could still hear it echo in my head. I glanced behind the car in the driveway. What if they went back in the house? I asked myself. Somehow, that possibility terrified me more than if they had jumped out at me then and there. I had to go into that house if I wanted to find Jason. Again, I tried restraining my uneven breathing and proceeded into the front yard. I walked around the car, behind the side of the house, to the backyard. I don't think I have ever been more alert in my life. No security light came on as I approached the back entrance. I walked up the 3 steps of the back porch, accidentally kicking over what looked to be a garden gnome that rolled on its side. The sound terrified me. I glanced up, expecting something to run at me. The screen door was closed, but the house door behind it was slightly ajar. "You're early," said a voice from the dark. I jumped again, placing a hand on my chest. A tall man moved toward me, opening the door and inviting me inside. The man seemed taller than I remembered, and his eyes were much wider, as if gazing alarmed at something they could see and I could not. I even turned around to make sure, but we were alone. The veins on his neck ran thickly from his prominent collarbone to his ears. We walked down a small hallway to a door under the stairs. He pulled it open and stood aside. "Down here!" His voice was commanding, leaving me no moment to hesitate. I walked past him into the stairwell. As I did so, I noticed an acrid smell, like what you'd get opening the garden composite barrel. Clearly, he hadn't showered in days. I walked down the stairs into the basement, the man following right on my heels. The light of a small lamp below grew stronger as we approached the bottom. It revealed, on the wall of the basement, a huge map of Monsoon Point, and what looked like an array of materials you'd see in a police detective's office. The frayed and yellowing map had seen better days. Framing it were newspaper clippings with headlines like, "Hiker goes missing," "Family arrives and dies," "Downward turn in Monsoon Point population." Below the wall was a table with a lamp on it and a single chair pulled up to it. Lots of documents spread out over the table, covered in part by a half-opened dark green canvas bag. There was also an ancient computer, older than anything I'd ever seen. "What is this?" I asked the man. "Who are you? Where is Jason?" He was visibly irritated by my insistence. "Look, I don't know," he spat. I looked closer at the map of Monsoon Point. I could see small red X's all around the map. "What are these?" I moved right up to the map and placed a finger on the closest red X. The man's agitation suddenly lifted. He smiled and leaned his head to the side as if I'd asked him about the flowers in his garden. "What you're looking at," he whispered, "is where all the bodies have been found in Monsoon Point in the last 13 years. He spoke as though this was ordinary knowledge for him. I felt warm suddenly and hoped he hadn't noticed my intake of breath. He came closer and looked down into my face. "I think I can help you find Jason," he said in a conspiratorial tone as he put a hand on my bare arm. The lamp on the desk lit up the right side of his face. It was the first time I got a good look at him. He was young, probably my age. His green eyes were terrified. The spot on my arm where his hand lay was warm and sticky with sweat. I had so many questions, but how stable was this man? He took his hand off me and started scrambling through the papers in the case. His demeanor made another sharp turn to something perfunctory and official. "We might be here a while," he sniffed. "You want tea or coffee?" I shook my head. I turned back to the map, feeling the need to get my bearings. I found Pancake Manor, and then trailed from there to other spots I was familiar with in town. As my eyes moved along, I became aware of the quantity of red X's in the cemetery, on the side streets, and in plots of land where houses probably stood. Main Street was clear of them, at least. And then I found Lemon Tree Avenue. "Wait," I said, pointing to a red X. "This is here. Number 16, that's next door to where we are?" Keeping my finger on the spot, I looked around at him. "Did someone die here?" I tried hard to swallow the lump in my throat. He let out a long, high-pitched laugh. In the span of 5 minutes, he'd gone from fear to efficiency to wild humor. Something was very wrong with this man. I instantly regretted coming to his home so late at night. He threw his head to the side, his hair fanning back behind his face.
"This isn't my house,"
he replied, as though he were stifling a laugh. "It's no one's, really. You could call it a community center." He giggled at his own joke. "But you're right. It's close to the house we're interested in." His green eyes bore into mine. "What house?" "Next door. Kate's, of course." "Kate," I breathed. "Yes, the new one in town." And now his voice was full of pity. His lips protruded as if he was so sorry. I felt dizzy. Each time he spoke, he was a different person. "From the coffee shop?" "Oh, you met her?" he asked, sarcastically. Terror rushed over me with a paralyzing hold. The man drew back his arm and punched me in the face with a closed fist. I fell backwards, tasting blood from a split inner lip, groaning as I hit the cold basement floor. I stumbled to my feet and took a defensive stance. I was no match for this man physically. He seemed to grow taller each time I looked at him. "Tonight," he said casually, taking a step toward me, "you're going to kill Kate." There was no way I'd misheard him, though I prayed I had. What was almost more terrifying than the punch he threw was that his demeanor kept changing with every sentence he spoke, from scared to laughing to serious to a sort of dramatic actor in a children's educational play. Now he seemed to be telling me the rules to some reality TV adventure game. He paced left and right, as if he was writing the rules on the spot. "Now, these are your options." He threw open the green canvas bag on the table to reveal various kinds of weapons. "You're going to kill Kate, and if you don't..." He picked a large hammer out of the bag. "I will select the blunt one and beat you over and over until you give in." His tone now was surgical. He looked the hammer up and down as if inspecting it for flaws or inadequacies. "That would be so sad, really." He nodded as he said this, like a doctor delivering bad news. "Where is Jason?" I asked.
"Jason!" he screeched, and then calmed himself.
"Jason is making amends for an ex he never finished." The man was looking at a spot on the map where, as yet, no red X had been placed. Was there supposed to have been one? Had he tried to force Jason to kill someone? Had Jason refused? This thought stirred me. If Jason could find a way out, I certainly could. I had to get out of this basement. As if sensing my resolution, the man said, "Hurry up and choose your weapon." He thrust the bag at me, and from his heavy coat pulled out a pistol. He held it to my temple. "And don't even think about escaping. You can't. No one ever has. Not in 13 years. I looked into the bag at the array of weapons. A butcher knife, another hammer, a large barbecue fork. Each item looked rusted, dirty, and used. I picked up the butcher knife. It wasn't very heavy and stable in my hand. I couldn't take this man down physically, he was too big, but I might be able to wield a quick blow with the knife. "Move!" he ordered, forcibly turning me around and moving the gun from my temple to the back of my head. I headed up the staircase, gripping the butcher knife tightly in my hand. I climbed the stairs slowly, one at a time, trying to delay the inevitable. The stairs creaked under my trembling feet. Somehow, between this basement and the house next door, I had to end this nightmare. Her husband? I spoke frantically. He'll... out of town. Don't worry. We'll get the grieving widower, too. My face throbbed. I felt a welt raising on my cheek. We came up the stairs and exited onto the back porch. I had a sudden idea, no time to process. It was now or never. I let the butcher knife slide from my hand. It hit the wood of the porch with a heavy thud. "What are you doing?" the man whispered hotly, pressing the gun deeper into my head. His voice now was that of a parent scolding a 4-year-old boy for drawing on the walls with crayons. I bent over to pick up the knife. This was my chance. Moving quickly, I threw my whole body against him, backing him up and throwing him off balance. We fell together, and I reached for his pistol arm and pinned it onto the porch floor. With my other hand, I grabbed the garden gnome and brought it down on his head with every bit of strength I had. Again and again, I brought it down. I heard crushing and then gasping. Everything in my mind told me to run. I made it back through the moonlit yard to my car and sped away as fast as I could from Monsoon Point. As I drove, I frantically tried to wipe the blood off my hands, but the iron-sweet smell stayed with me all the way home. Over the next few weeks, I lived in a state of continual alarm. I expected any minute to hear from the Monsoon Point police. Someone must have found the man's body. Surely an investigation would lead detectives to Ben's hotel in the presence of a visiting stranger, namely me. But no one knocked on my door, and I found nothing online or in the press about a murder in Monsoon Point. Had I killed the man? Maybe he had survived and crawled away somewhere. Or maybe the police in Monsoon Point were just so accustomed to bodies showing up that they didn't even bother. For my own part, I couldn't return to life as normal. You don't just pick up and move forward after something like that. I suppose I could have gone to the police myself, but for what? So far, no crime has been reported. I've taken a break from work in Waverly and moved back in with my mother in Blackshear. But no matter what I do, I can't stop the dreams. Mom, if this is the last communication you ever get from me, know this. I don't blame you for telling me about Monsoon Point. That conversation we had at dinner that night, I don't want you to feel guilty. I'm sorry I didn't take your fear seriously. I understand it now. I keep going over and over in my mind what happened in Monsoon Point. Mostly, I am beset by a feeling that I have left something undone. I feel the pull back to that place. Fighting this urge has become my constant preoccupation. But I'm starting to get tired. How long do you let something haunt you before you turn and face it? I have to go back. Maybe I will end up like Jason, whatever they did to him. Or maybe I'll be the one to put an end to their madness. What if he is still alive? I have so many questions. I'm writing this all down because I want you to know what happened to me. What that man tried to make me do. What he tried to make Jason do. And what this town seems to have been doing to its tourists for the last 13 years. I have this feeling that something is left undone. And I have to go and make it right.